So hello guys, welcome to another edition of TIT JavaScript class with the one and only Guru B. So today we're going to do something about an interval counting, where we can just allow the program to count after a certain interval. So let's move as fast as possible to see how this works. I have created an HTML file and I've saved it in a folder here on a TIT class where we have all of our materials. So that should be very easy for you to do. Just the file name .html. So quickly to move faster, say our doc tag should be HTML because it's HTML5 I'm using, and our HTML now should have a language of English. Our HTML should have a language of English to tell our web browser that we wrote this code using English. And we'll open our header section here. If our title of our page should be let's count. And then we'll open our script session. Open our script session here. So in the script session, we're going to load the document add event listener, and the event listener take two arguments. One of them is to load the DOM content loader. Is going to load all of the codes on this page and store it so that we can use it in a later feature. And then the next thing we can do is to create a function. So like I told you in previous video, you can also create a function like this. And then what we're going to do with this function, we want to now say that set the interval of this count every 1000 or every 1 second. So every 1 second is going to count by itself. And then we can now try to do something to change certain things. But now let's create a function here as well. Let's set a variable first called counter. Set a variable called counter, and then we're going to initialize this variable to 0, and create a function called count that is going to take no argument. And this function called count is going to increment this counter variable by itself. So when it does that, we want to do something. We want to change now our document or query selector. We want to find some kind of an ID which we're going to create later on to change. So find this ID that is called counter, and then when you find that ID, we want you to change the inner HTML or whatever content that will be in this thing with the ID of counter. Change that thing to counter. Okay, so it's going to find some kind of thing we're going to create later on. It could be an H1 and an H2 with an ID of counter. Once the document is going to load throughout the entire document, and it's going to find that thing. So once it finds it, then it's going to change whatever content we have in that thing. It's going to change it or put it equals to the counter. And what is counter? Counter is a variable that we initialize at 0, but then we create a function that is going to always increment or always continue to add from 0 to 1 to 3 to 2 like that. And it's going to do that every 1 second on this interval of every 1 second. So that is all for our JavaScript session. We can now come here and do some starting, create some style for our page. And in the start section, we want to start our H1, which we're going to create later on in our body. We want to start our H1 and put all of the text in the center, and then we want to increase the size of our writing. So the font size should be increased to at least 72 pixels. And then we want to change the writing style, so our font family should also be changed. Our font family should also be changed. Let's use Sunset, sorry. And then that's all for our start session. We can now create our body. We can now create our body section, and in this body section we can create an H1 with an ID of counter that we initialized up there before, an ID of counter that's going to start from 0 or show the initial value of 0 to the user or whoever that will visit this page. And then we can now close our H1, create another H1 that's going to say counting after every 1 second. So we can close that H1 as well. And then we can now close our HTML here. We can now close our HTML here. So basically, this is all it is, and let's try to see what happens if we run this code. Okay, so I'm going to come here. Oh buddy, what's up? I'm going to open it in my Chrome browser. So you see here, every 1 second is going to keep counting or keep incrementing every 1 second. So we can as well do more things to the side. So let me a little bit explain what's happening here. So in the script section, which is going to tell our browser that take everything within this block as a JavaScript code. So an event listener is something that we create to do certain things, but then we have to load this DOM. This DOM is the document object model. So it's going to load everything on this page, because in case we want to use something down, the code runs per line. So it takes line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4. But in case on line 9 you want to run something that is on line 24, so the code will not read it. It's going to read an error because it have not archived or read that line before. It have just read from line 1 to line 8. But then you are saying something on line 9 that they have not read before, so it's going to read error. So that's why we added this document content loader here, the DOM, so that it can read everything on this page. We set an interval. It is a keyword in JavaScript. We set an interval that's going to count every 1 second, and then we declare a variable called counter. This variable name could be any name that we want to use, and we set a variable starting from 0. We could start from any number. Okay, we can start from 5, we can start from 10, but we want to start counting from 0. And we create a function here called count that is going to always increment or count by itself. And we could also use counter equals counter plus 1. If we also do that, we could also use count equal count plus 1. That will also increment that. But then this one is much faster and much easier to use, counter plus plus. Then we say that try to loop throughout the entire document, and then once you find an ID, this hash sign means ID. If it was a dot, means a class. So find this ID called counter and change whatever content it has to this name called counter, and this name called counter is this variable that we initialize up here. So here we have an ID here called counter, so it's going to change whatever it has, and you're having what, this 0 here, so it's going to change whatever it has here to this counter, which is now going to increment on the scale. And then we just have an H1 here that is going to say counting every 1 second. So we could choose this to say count every 2 seconds. Every 2 seconds. So let's reload this page. So every 2 seconds is going to count. So that's it, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any question, you can message me or leave a comment. Thank you so much for following TIT.